and the polite name for leprosy was the white skin. Chapter 9. For the first time in 3 nights, Okonkwo slept. He woke up once in the middle of the night. His mind went back to the past 3 days without making him feel uneasy. He began to wonder why he had felt uneasy at all. It was like a man wondering in broad daylight why a dream had appeared so terrible to him at night. He stretched himself and scratched his thigh where a mosquito had bitten him as he slept. Another one was wailing near his right ear. He slapped the ear and hoped he had killed it. Why did they always go for one's ears? When he was a child, his mother had told him a story about it. But it was as silly as all women's stories. Mosquito, she had said, had asked Ear to marry him, whereupon Ear fell on the floor in uncontrollable laughter. "How much longer do you think you will live?" she asked. "You are already a skeleton." Mosquito went away humiliated, and any time he passed her way, he told Ear that he was still alive. Okonkwo turned on his side and went back to sleep. He was roused in the morning by someone banging on his door. "Who is that?" he growled. He knew it must be Akwefi. Of his 3 wives, Akwefi was the only one who would have the audacity to bang on his door. "Izinma is dying," came her voice, and all the tragedy and sorrow of her life were packed in those words. Okonkwo sprang from his bed, pushed back the bolt on his door, and ran to Akwefi's hut. Izinma lay shivering on a mat beside a huge fire that her mother had kept burning all night. "It is Iba," said Okonkwo, as he took his machete and went into the bush to collect the leaves and grasses and barks of trees that went into making the medicine for Iba. Akwefi knelt beside the sick child, occasionally feeling with her palm the wet, burning forehead. Izinma was an only child, and the center of her mother's world. Very often, it was Izinma who decided what food her mother should prepare. Akwefi even gave her such delicacies as eggs, which children were rarely allowed to eat because such food tempted them to steal. One day, as Izinma was eating an egg, Okonkwo had come in unexpectedly from his hut. He was greatly shocked and swore to beat Akwefi if she dared to give the child eggs again. But it was impossible to refuse Izinma anything. After her father's rebuke, she developed an even keener appetite for eggs. And she enjoyed above all the secrecy in which she now ate them. Her mother always took her into their bedroom and shut the door. Izinma did not call her mother Ne, like all children. She called her by her name, Akwefi, as her father and other grown-up people did. The relationship between them was not only that of mother and child. There was something in it like the companionship of equals, which was strengthened by such little conspiracies as eating eggs in the bedroom. Akwefi had suffered a good deal in her life. She had borne 10 children, and 9 of them had died in infancy, usually before the age of 3. As she buried one child after another, her sorrow gave way to despair, and then to grim resignation. The birth of her children, which should be a woman's crowning glory, became for Akwefi a mere physical agony devoid of promise. The naming ceremony after 7 market weeks became an empty ritual. Her deepening despair found expression in the names she gave her children. One of them was a pathetic cry. "Onwumbiko, Death, I implore you." But Death took no notice. Onwumbiko died in his 15th month. The next child was a girl, Ozoemina. May it not happen again. She died in her 11th month, and 2 others after her. Akwefi then became defiant, and called her next child Onwuma. Death may please himself, and he did. After the death of Akwefi's 2nd child, Okonkwo had gone to a medicine man, who was also a diviner, of the Offa Oracle, to inquire what was amiss. This man told him that the child was an Ogbanje, one of those wicked children who, when they died, entered their mother's wombs to be born again. "When your wife becomes pregnant again," he said, "let her not sleep in her hut. Let her go and stay with her people. In that way, she will elude her wicked tormentor and break its evil cycle of birth and death." Akwefi did as she was asked. As soon as she became pregnant, she went to live with her old mother in another village. It was there that her third child was born and circumcised on the 8th day. She did not return to Okonkwo's compound until 3 days before the naming ceremony. The child was called Onwumbiko. Onwumbiko was not given proper burial when he died. Okonkwo had called in another medicine man who was famous in the clan for his great knowledge about Ogbanje children. His name was Okagwe Uyanwa. Okagwe was a very striking figure, tall, with a full beard and a bald head. He was light in complexion, and his eyes were red and fiery. He always gnashed his teeth as he listened to those who came to consult him. He asked Okonkwo a few questions about the dead child. All the neighbors and relations who had come to mourn gathered round them. "On what market day was it born?" he asked. "Oye," replied Okonkwo. "And it died this morning?" Okonkwo said yes, and only then realized for the first time that the child had died on the same market day as it had been born. The neighbors and relations also saw the coincidence, and said among themselves that it was very significant. "Where do you sleep with your wife? In your obi, or in her own hut?" asked the medicine man. "In her hut." "In future, call her into your obi." The medicine man then ordered that there should be no mourning for the dead child. He brought out a sharp razor from the goatskin bag slung from his left shoulder and began to mutilate the child. Then he took it away to bury in the evil forest, holding it by the ankle and dragging it on the ground behind him. After such treatment, it would think twice before coming again, unless it was one of the stubborn ones who returned, carrying the stamp of their mutilation, a missing finger, or perhaps a dark line where the medicine man's razor had cut them. By the time Onwumbiko died, Ekwefi had become a very bitter woman. Her husband's first wife had already had 3 sons, all strong and healthy. When she had borne her 3rd son in succession, Okonkwo had gathered a goat for her, as was the custom. Ekwefi had nothing but good wishes for her, but she had grown so bitter about her own chi that she could not rejoice with others over their good fortune. And so, on the day that Moye's mother celebrated the birth of her 3 sons with feasting and music, Ekwefi was the only person in the happy company who went about with a cloud on her brow. Her husband's wife took this for malevolence, as husbands' wives were wont to. How could she know that Ekwefi's bitterness did not flow outwards to others, but inwards, into her own soul? That she did not blame others for their good fortune, but her own evil chi, who denied her any. At last, Ezinma was born, and although ailing, she seemed determined to live. At first, Ekwefi accepted her, as she had accepted others, with listless resignation. But when she lived on to her 4th, 5th, and 6th years, love returned once more to her mother, and with love, anxiety. She determined to nurse her child to health, and she put all her being into it. She was rewarded by occasional spells of health, during which Ezinma bubbled with energy like fresh palm wine. At such times, she seemed beyond danger. But all of a sudden, she would go down again. Everybody knew she was an Ogbanje. These sudden bouts of sickness and health were typical of her kind, but she had lived so long that perhaps she had decided to stay. Some of them did become tired of their evil rounds of birth and death, or took pity on their mothers, and stayed. Ekwefi believed deep inside her that Ezinma had come to stay. She believed because it was that faith alone that gave her own life any kind of meaning. And this faith had been strengthened when a year or so ago a medicine man had dug up Ezinma's Iyi Uwa. Everyone knew then that she would live, because her bond with the world of Ogbanje had been broken. Ekwefi was reassured, but such was her anxiety for her daughter that she could not rid herself completely of her fear. And although she believed that the Iyi Uwa, which had been dug up, was genuine, she could not ignore the fact that some really evil children sometimes misled people into digging up a specious one. But Ezinma's Iyi Uwa had looked real enough. It was a smooth pebble wrapped in a dirty rag. The man who dug it up was the same Ogagwe, who was famous in all the clan for his knowledge in these matters. Ezinma had not wanted to cooperate with him at first, but that was only to be expected. No Ogbanje would yield her secrets easily, and most of them never did, because they died too young, before they could be asked questions. Where did you bury your Iyi Unwa? Okagwe asked Ezinma. She was 9 then, and was just recovering from a serious illness. What is Iyi Uwa? She asked in return. You know what it is. You buried it in the ground somewhere, so that you can die and return again to torment your mother. Ezinma looked at her mother, whose eyes, sad and pleading, were fixed on her. Answer the question at once, roared Okonkwo, who stood beside her. All the family were there, and some of the neighbors too. Leave her to me, the medicine man told Okonkwo in a cool, confident voice. He turned again to Ezinma. Where did you bury your Iyi Uwa? Where they bury children, she replied, and the quiet spectators murmured to themselves. Come along then, and show me the spot, said the medicine man. The crowd set out with Ezinma leading the way, and Okagwe following closely behind her. Okonkwo came next, and Ekwefe followed him. When she came to the main road, Ezinma turned left, as if she was going to the stream. But you said it was where they bury the children, asked the medicine man. No, said Ezinma, whose feeling of importance was manifest in her sprightly walk. She sometimes broke into a run, and stopped again suddenly. The crowd followed her silently. Women and children returning from the stream with pots of water on their heads wondered what was happening, until they saw Okagwe and guessed that it must be something to do with Ogbanje. They all knew Ekwefi and her daughter very well. When she got to the big Udala tree, Ezinma turned left into the bush, and the crowd followed her. Because of her size, she made her way through trees and creepers more quickly than her followers. The bush was alive with the tread of feet on dry leaves and sticks, and the moving aside of tree branches. Ezinma went deeper and deeper, and the crowd went with her. Then she suddenly turned round, and began to walk back to the road. Everybody stood to let her pass, and then filed after her. If you bring us all this way for nothing, I shall beat sense into you, Okonkwo threatened. I have told you to let her alone. I know how to deal with them, said Okagwe. Ezinma led the way back to the road, looked left and right, and turned right, and so they arrived home again. Where did you bury your Iyi Uwa? Asked Okagwe, when Ezinma finally stopped outside her father's obi. Okagwe's voice was unchanged. It was quiet and confident. It is near that orange tree, Ezinma said. And why did you not say so, you wicked daughter of a Kalagoli? Okonkwo swore furiously. The medicine man ignored him. Come and show me the exact spot, he said quietly to Ezinma. It is here, she said, when they got to the tree. Point at the spot with your finger, said Okagwe. It is here, said Ezinma, touching the ground with her finger. Okonkwo stood by, rumbling like thunder in the rainy season. Bring me a hoe, said Okagwe. When Ekwefi brought the hoe, he had already put aside his goatskin bag and his big cloth, and was in his underwear, a long and thin strip of cloth, wound round the waist like a belt, and then passed between the legs, to be fastened to the belt behind. He immediately set to work digging a pit, where Ezinma had indicated. The neighbors sat around watching the pit becoming deeper and deeper. The dark topsoil soon gave way to the bright red earth, with which women scrubbed the floors and walls of huts. Okagwe worked tirelessly, and in silence, his back shining with perspiration. Okonkwo stood by the pit. He asked Okagwe to come up and rest, while he took a hand. But Okagwe said he was not tired yet. Ekwefi went into her hut to cook yams. Her husband had brought out more yams than usual, because the medicine man had to be fed. Ezinma went with her, and helped in preparing the vegetables. There is too much green vegetable, she said. Don't you see the pot is full of yams? Ekwefi asked. And you know how leaves become smaller after cooking? Yes, said Ezinma. That was why the snake lizard killed his mother. Very true, said Ekwefi. He gave his mother 7 baskets of vegetables to cook, and in the end there were only 3, and so he killed her. said Izinma. That is not the end of the story. Oh ho, said Izinma. I remember now. He brought another 7 baskets and cooked them himself. And there were again only 3, so he killed himself too. Outside the Obi, Okagwe and Okonkwo were digging the pit to find where Izinma had buried her Iyi Uwa. Neighbors sat around watching. The pit was now so deep that they no longer saw the digger. They only saw the red earth he threw up, mounting higher and higher. Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, stood near the edge of the pit because he wanted to take in all that happened. Okagwe had again taken over the digging from Okonkwo. He worked, as usual, in silence. The neighbors and Okonkwo's wives were now talking. The children had lost interest and were playing. Suddenly, Okagwe sprang to the surface with the agility of a leopard. It is very near now, he said. I have felt it. There was immediate excitement, and those who were sitting jumped to their feet. Call your wife and child, he said to Okonkwo. But Ekwefi and Izinma had heard the noise and run out to see what it was. Okagwe went back into the pit, which was now surrounded by spectators. After a few more holefuls of earth, he struck the Iyi Uwa. He raised it carefully with a hoe and threw it to the surface. Some women ran away in fear when it was thrown, but they soon returned, and everyone was gazing at the rag from a reasonable distance. Okagwe emerged, and without saying a word or even looking at the spectators, he went to his goatskin bag, took out 2 leaves, and began to chew them. When he had swallowed them, he took up the rag with left hand and began to untie it. And then, the smooth, shiny pebble fell out. He picked it up. Is this yours? He asked Izinma. Yes, she replied. All the women shouted with joy, because Ekwefi's troubles were at last ended. All this had happened more than a year ago, and Izinma had not been ill since. And then, suddenly, she had begun to shiver in the night. Ekwefi brought her to the fireplace, spread her mat on the floor, and built a fire. But she had got worse and worse. As she knelt by her, feeling with her palm the wet, burning forehead, she prayed 1,000 times. Although her husband's wives were saying that it was nothing more than Iba, she did not hear them. Okonkwo returned from the bush, carrying on his left shoulder a large bundle of grasses and leaves, roots and barks of medicinal trees and shrubs. He went into Ekwefi's hut, put down his load, and sat down. Get me a pot, he said, and leave the child alone. Ekwefi went to bring the pot, and Okonkwo selected the best from his bundle, in their due proportions, and cut them up. He put them in the pot, and Ekwefi poured in some water. Is that enough? She asked, when she had poured in about half of the water in the bowl. A little more. I said a little. Are you deaf? Okonkwo roared at her. She set the pot on the fire, and Okonkwo took up his machete to return to his obi. You must watch the pot carefully, he said as he went, and don't allow it to boil over. If it does, its power will be gone. He went away to his hut, and Ekwefi began to tend the medicine pot, almost as if it was itself a sick child. Her eyes went constantly from Izinma to the boiling pot, and back to Izinma. Okonkwo returned when he felt the medicine had cooked long enough. He looked it over and said it was done. Bring me a low stool for Izinma, he said, and a thick mat. He took down the pot from the fire and placed it in front of the stool. He then roused Izinma and placed her on the stool astride the steaming pot. The thick mat was thrown over both. Izinma struggled to escape from the choking and overpowering steam, but she was held down. She started to cry. When the mat was at last removed, she was drenched in perspiration. Ekwefi mopped her with a piece of cloth, and she lay down on a dry mat and was soon asleep. Chapter 10. Large crowds began to gather on the village Ilo as soon as the edge had worn off the sun's heat and it was no longer painful on the body. Most communal ceremonies took place at that time of the day, so that even when it was said that a ceremony would begin after the midday meal, everyone understood that it would begin a long time later, when the sun's heat had softened. It was clear way the crowd stood or sat that the ceremony was for men. There were many women, but they looked on from the fringe like outsiders. The titled men and elders sat on their stools, waiting for the trials to begin. In front of them was a row of stools on which nobody sat. There were 9 of them. 2 little groups of people stood at a respectable distance beyond the stools. They faced the elders. There were 3 men in one group, and 3 men and 1 woman in the other. The woman was Umbafo, and the 3 men with her were her brothers. In the other group were her husband, Uzowulu, and his relatives. Umbafo and her brothers were as still as statues into whose faces the artist has molded defiance. Uzowulu and his relative, on the other hand, were whispering together. It looked like whispering, but they were really talking at the top of their voices. Everybody in the crowd was talking. It was like the market. From a distance, the noise was a deep rumble carried by the wind. An iron gong sounded, setting up a wave of expectation in the crowd. Everyone looked in the direction of the Egugu house. Gom, 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 went the gong, and a powerful flute blew a high-pitched blast. Then came the voices of the Egugu, guttural and awesome. The wave struck the women and children, and there was a backward stampede, but it was momentary. They were already far enough where they stood, and there was room for running away if any of the Egugu should go towards them. The drum sounded again, and the flute blew. The Egugu house was now a pandemonium of quavering voices. Aru oyim de 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 filled the air as the spirits of the ancestors, just emerged from the earth, greeted themselves in their esoteric language. The Egugu house into which they emerged faced the forest, away from the crowd, who saw only its back with the many-colored patterns and drawings done by specially chosen women at regular intervals. These women never saw the inside of the hut. No woman ever did. They scrubbed and painted the outside walls under the supervision of men. If they imagined what was inside, they kept their imagination to themselves. No woman ever asked questions about the most powerful and the most secret cult in the clan. Aru oyim de 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 flew around the dark, closed hut like tongues of fire. The ancestral spirits of the clan were abroad. The metal gong beat continuously now, and the flute, shrill and powerful, floated on the chaos. And then, the Egugu appeared. The women and children sent up a great shout and took to their heels. It was instinctive. A woman fled as soon as an Egugu came in sight. And when, as on that day, 9 of the greatest masked spirits in the clan came out together, it was a terrifying spectacle. Even Umbafo took to her heels and had to be restrained by her brothers. Each of the 9 Egugu represented a village of the clan. Their leader was called Evil Forest. Smoke poured out of his head. The 9 villages of Umwofia had grown out of the 9 sons of the first father of the clan. Evil Forest represented the village of Umweru, or the children of Eru, who was the eldest of the 9 sons. Umwofia Kwenu shouted the leading Egugu, pushing the air with his raffia arms. The elders of the clan replied, Ya! Umwofia Kwenu! Ya! Umwofia Kwenu! Ya! Evil Forest then thrust the pointed end of his rattling staff into the earth, and it began to shake and rattle, like something agitating with a metallic life. He took the first of the empty stools, and the 8 other Egugu began to sit in order of seniority after him. Okonkwo's wives, and perhaps other women as well, might have noticed that the second Egugu had the springy walk of Okonkwo. And they might also have noticed that Okonkwo was not among the titled men and elders who sat behind the row of Egugu. But if they thought these things, they kept them within themselves. The Egugu, with the springy walk, was one of the dead fathers of the clan. He looked terrible with his smoked raffia body, a huge wooden face painted white, except for the round, hollow eyes and the charred teeth that were as big as a man's fingers. On his head were 2 powerful horns. When all the Egugu had sat down and the sound of the many tiny bells and rattles on their bodies had subsided, Evil Forest addressed the 2 groups of people facing them. Uzowulu's body, I salute you, he said. Spirits always addressed humans as bodies. Uzowulu bent down and touched the earth with his right hand as a sign of submission. Our father, my hand has touched the ground, he said. Uzowulu's body. Do you know me? Asked the spirit. How can I know you, father? You are beyond our knowledge. Evil Forest then turned to the other group and addressed the eldest of the three brothers. The body of Odukwe, I greet you, he said. And Odukwe bent down and touched the earth. The hearing then began. Uzowulu stepped forward and presented his case. That woman standing there is my wife, Mbafo. I married her with my money and my yams. I do not owe my in-laws anything. I owe them no yams. I owe them no cocoa yams. One morning, 3 of them came to my house, beat me up, and took my wife and children away. This happened in the rainy season. I have waited in vain for my wife to return. At last, I went to my in-laws and said to them, You have taken back your sister. I did not send her away. You yourselves took her. The law of the clan is that you should return her bride price. But my wife's brothers said they had nothing to tell me. So I have brought the matter to the fathers of the clan. My case is finished. I salute you. Your words are good, said the leader of the Gugu. Let us hear Odukwe. His words may also be good. Odukwe was short and thick-set. He stepped forward, saluted the spirits, and began his story. My in-law has told you that we went to his house, beat him up, and took our sister and her children away. All that is true. He told you that he came to take back her bride price, and we refused to give it him. That also is true. My in-law, Uzowulu, is a beast. My sister lived with him for 9 years. During those years, no single day passed in the sky without his beating the woman. We have tried to settle their quarrels, time without number, and on each occasion, Uzowulu was guilty. It is a lie, Uzowulu shouted. 2 years ago, continued Odukwe, when she was pregnant, he beat her until she miscarried. It is a lie. She miscarried after she had gone to sleep with her lover. Uzowulu's body, I salute you, said Evil Forest, silencing him. What kind of lover sleeps with a pregnant woman? There was a loud murmur of approbation from the crowd. Odukwe continued. Last year, when my sister was recovering from an illness, he beat her again, so that if the neighbors had not gone in to save her, she would have been killed. We heard of it, and did as you have been told. The law of Umwofia is that if a woman runs away from her husband, her bride price is returned. But in this case, she ran away to save her life. Her 2 children belong to Uzowulu. We do not dispute it, but they are too young to leave their mother. If, in the other hand, Uzowulu should recover from his madness and come in the proper way to beg his wife to return, she will do so, on the understanding that if he ever beats her again, we shall cut off his genitals for him. The crowd roared with laughter. Evil Forest rose to his feet, and order was immediately restored. A steady cloud of smoke rose from his head. He sat down again and called 2 witnesses. They were both Uzowulu's neighbors, and they agreed about the beating. Evil Forest then stood up, pulled out his staff, and thrust it into the earth again. He ran a few steps in the direction of the women. They all fled in terror, only to return to their places almost immediately. The 9 Egugu then went away to consult together in their house. They were silent for a long time. Then the metal gong sounded, and the flute was blown. The Egugu had emerged once again from their underground home. They saluted one another, and then reappeared on the Evo. Umwofia Kwenu, roared Evil Forest, facing the elders and grandees of the clan. Yah! Replied the thunderous crowd. Then silence descended from the sky and swallowed the noise. Evil Forest began to speak, and all the while he spoke, everyone was silent. The 8 other Egugu were as still as statues. We have heard both sides of the case, said Evil Forest. Our duty is not to blame this man or to praise that, but to settle the dispute. He turned to Uzowulu's group and allowed a short pause. Uzowulu's body, I salute you, he said. Our father, my hand has touched the ground. replied Uzawulu, touching the earth. Uzawulu's body. Do you know me? How can I know you, father? You are beyond our knowledge. Uzawulu replied. I am Evil Forest. I kill a man on the day that his life is sweetest to him. That is true, replied Uzawulu. Go to your in-laws with a pot of wine and beg your wife to return to you. It is not bravery when a man fights with a woman. He turned to Odukwe and allowed a brief pause. Odukwe's body. I greet you, he said. My hand is on the ground, replied Odukwe. Do you know me? No man can know you, replied Odukwe. I am Evil Forest. I am dry meat that fills the mouth. I am fire that burns without faggots. If your in-law brings wine to you, let your sister go with him. I salute you. He pulled his staff from the hard earth and thrust it back. Umwofia Kwenu, he roared, and the crowd answered. I don't know why such a trifle should come before the Egugu, said one elder to another. Don't you know what kind of man Uzawulu is? He will not listen to any other decision, replied the other. As they spoke, two other groups of people had replaced the first before the Egugu, and a great land case began.